Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Methods Guru for Sage Methodspace, and I'm pleased to be joined today by a group of current and former students who've participated in the Duke University Bass Connections program. And we're particularly interested in this because we're focusing this year on research relevance and this month on interdisciplinary research. Before we get started, if you're new to Methodspace, this is a blog that is sponsored by Sage Publishing, and we're interested in everything to do with designing, planning, conducting, analyzing, writing about research, and sharing results in all different kinds of ways. And you can see at the center of this diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are a beginner, or student, or an experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. So welcome, everyone. And I wonder if you could just begin by introducing yourself, and we'll just go around. So Matthew, why don't you start?
Hi, my name is Matthew Ralph. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm originally from San Diego, California, and I am a senior at Duke University studying statistical science and political science.
Great. And Catherine?
Hi, my name is Catherine Grudinsky, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I am a fourth-year doctoral student at Duke in the public policy school.
Great. And Sahil?
Hi, I'm Sahil. I use he, him pronouns, and I graduated from Duke in 2020, where I pursued a self-designed degree called Health Innovation, Evidence to Impact through our school's Interdisciplinary Program 2 department. And then now I'm a first-year med student at Harvard Medical School.
Great. So welcome to all of you, and I'm really glad you're able to join me. To begin with, what attracted you to participate in the Bass Connections program? And just jump in, whoever would like to respond.
Well, I can share my intro to Bass Connections. So when I first started the PhD program at Duke, it kind of came to it from kind of a research background. So I had sort of a research career at another university, but was sort of shifting disciplines. And I heard about the Bass Connections program early on as a way to get some support to do some hands-on research and also get some experience also teaching and working with students. And it seemed like just a lot of different opportunities rolled into one. And so another doctoral student and I decided to put in an application with a faculty partner. And it just ticked a lot of boxes for all of us and seemed like a really unique opportunity that Duke had to offer. So that's kind of why we got into that.
How about you, Matthew?
I think Bass Connections is really one of the preeminent intro to research programs offered by Duke. I think that a lot of professors, especially those who are involved on Bass Connections teams, really do a good job in their courses to sort of, publicize. If you're interested in getting into research, Bass Connections is definitely a good option to check out. And the program does a great job of sort of publicizing, the wide variety of topics. And, they really want students to sort of take a look through their offerings, see if any of these programs potentially interest them. I had a professor who was starting a team with another professor, and she, presented it to the class, and it was really something that interested in me. So that was sort of my introduction to the program.
How about you, Sahil?
Yeah, so for me, I feel like as a student who's interested in medicine, but really interested in how healthcare and policy and social science all connected, the traditional routes for a lot of pre-med students to engage with research has been working in a lab. And for me, I was like, well, if someone has an interest outside of that, what is like the best way for me to get exposure to these other
Mhm.
fields
Mhm.
that might not be in the traditional lab
Right.
setup that we might see in the basic sciences. And that's when I was really intrigued by the vast connections model, because we were going to learn all these other research skills. At least in my team was very focused from drawing from health services research and from policy, and thinking how I could learn those skills. And I think was particularly appealing as a first-year student is that the Vast Connections model actually gets you course credit. So when I
Mhm.
joined the Vast Connections team, I could actually say, wow, like this is one of my courses, and we're
Mhm.
meeting regularly. There were some
Mhm.
didactic components, and there's also some research components. So it's a really smooth transition for my first time doing research.
Right. So I like the way that all of you have described the kind of ability to kind of achieve multiple goals of that, you've got teaching and learning and practice and integration within a course that allows you to prioritize this kind of effort. So could you each just briefly, talk about the kinds of research projects you were involved with, including, what methods were used? Was it quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods, whatever? Matthew, why don't you start?
So my project is titled Mental Health and the Justice System in Durham County, and we really are investigating sort of a broad swath of issues within the local criminal justice system, so the jail incarcerated population within Durham County. And my project, at least my entry into it, started with a Data Plus program, which is sort of another side to the Bass Connections program, which is a paid summer internship that focuses a bit more on sort of like the primarily quantitative, like having sort of, it's a short period because it's a summer internship, so sort of less academic research and a bit more just like reports for stakeholders or sort of the various clients that we work with. But from that Data Plus, I had the opportunity to obviously continue into the Bass Connections program, and I've actually been on my team for 2 years now. And it's primarily a quantitative sort of outlook on the system. We have data from both the Duke Health System, which is the primary health care provider for the county, as well as the Durham County Detention Facility, which is that jail for the county. And we've really been interested in looking at the prevalence of severe mental illness and also substance use disorders within those populations, seeing how the interaction between those and other various demographic, socioeconomic factors affect an individual's propensity for rearrest.
So what was your role, and especially since you've been involved with this for 2 years, has your role changed over that period of time?
I, like I mentioned before, am a statistics major as one of my majors. So I think of all the undergraduates on the team, I am really sort of the undergraduate statistician. Our great project manager, Becky Tang, is also a statistics graduate student. So we do have a lot, within the statistics department on the program, sort of working on the methods for coming up with how to actually sort of, statistically analyze a lot of these trends we're interested in. And I think being on the team for multiple years, I definitely switched into a bit more of a supervisory role within the team. The team has also grown from 3 people to now we have 6 people. So, undergrads, I should say. So, we're really expanding our role, which allows us to tackle a lot more questions. But with that obviously comes a diffusion of responsibilities as well. So I think that my role has really transitioned from, in the beginning, we each had our own project, and we were really bouncing ideas off of each other and working very closely. But as the team has grown and as we really nailed down the specific sort of research questions we're interested in with the data we have, we've really been able to sort of, work in small groups on these projects, but having at least one person on each on each team, which is really focused on the methodology that we're using.
Great. So Catherine?
Sure. So my project also involved the justice system. And actually one thing I was going to say earlier is a great thing about BASS is it does allow you to address topics and areas that are not covered very well by existing course offerings at Duke. And when I first came to Duke, that was something I noticed, was there weren't a lot of courses that I could take or be involved in that had to do with the criminal justice system, kind of any aspect of that. So through BAS, we thought this was a great opportunity to address that topic and kind of gather people together around that topic. And so the project that I helped start was focused on jails and kind of the lack of data that exists on local jails in the country, but also specifically in North Carolina. And so my partner, who was another PhD student, her interest was mostly quantitative and demographic. So she's a demographer, she's a sociologist. She had an interest in looking at existing jail databases where they do exist and trying to learn what we could from that. As a policy person and a more qualitative person, I was interested in figuring out kind of why this gap exists, why there aren't data that are out there on jails, and why governments aren't taking more of an interest in jails. And so she had a team of students that she was leading in quantitative methods, and I had a team that I was leading in qualitative methods, which entailed basically interviewing stakeholders about, what would it take for this sort of, data collection to be prioritized in the government. We were also talking to folks who work with jailed populations about what sort of data would you like to see? What data do you need to make decisions in your job on a day-to-day basis? So these might be, nonprofits, it might be jail directors, jail administrators, that sort of thing. And so, so our project was very multidisciplinary. Our faculty partner is from the law school. And so he kind of brought that perspective of, knowing kind of the appropriate legal questions to ask and the legal community to involve. So that's what our project focused on.
Great. And what about you, Sahil?
Yeah, so for me, BAS Connections was actually 3 years out of my 4 years at Duke. So I first started my sophomore year on a project that was called the Global Alliance on Disability and Health Innovation. And my subgroup of that project was doing a qualitative study, analyzing some semi-structured interviews on barriers to connecting to community services in Uganda once pediatric patients were discharged from the hospital. And after that year, I really sort of, one of the big takeaways were one of the drivers of these challenges between transitioning from the hospital back home and into your community were these broader social determinants of health. And so the following year, based on that project, I actually proposed to create my own project in which we would actually go from global to local, where we actually partnered with a local community health center in Durham, North Carolina, to create a help desk program where we would train undergraduate volunteers as community resource navigators who would help patients connect to resources in their community for their social needs like food, housing, transportation. And then I got a BAS Connections follow-on grant to actually lead that work my junior year of college. And then my senior year of college, I was able to take that small project and then start a new BAS Connections team. And from a methods perspective, I think what's really cool about BAS Connections is that I think all of us have referred to kind of these subgroup structures. So within these larger teams, we often have multiple sub-teams that are each taking on different parts of the project and each have different methodological foci. So we had one project that was really focused on implementation. How do we implement a program? How do we plan? How do we improve the quality of a program that we're actually delivering with real student volunteers? We had one group that was really focused on data, and they were basically taking all the data that we were collecting as part of our implementation process of our program and analyzing it. And then we had one group that was really focused on health policy and community engagement, and they were really focusing on stakeholder engagement using kind of relating our work to the broader policy environment. And I think it's also really cool, it's for a lot of our students, these projects that they've done through the team have actually served as foundations for other things. So for example, my Vast Connections project actually served as a foundation for my senior thesis. So we see all these curricular threads that we have students who start on a team and they can kind of grow it into follow-on projects, into senior thesis projects, sometimes even gap year opportunities to keep working with the faculty after they graduate. So I think that's kind of the very cool part of the interdisciplinary approach.
Yeah, that's and I like the way you described the implementation and actually tying the research to practice while the research is underway. All of you have referred to the interdisciplinary nature of this kind of opportunity, and how it ties in with your own kind of academic and career interests. Just to say a little bit more about that interdisciplinary nature and how your BAS project work, maybe, either tied in with your other coursework or influenced the future directions that you're taking. So Sahil, why don't you, since you began talking about that, why don't you start? As it sounds like the field you wanted to go into is interdisciplinary to begin with. I mean, maybe we could even say transdisciplinary, because it sounds like really a new field altogether that's emerging, which is always tricky when you are, kind of at the pivot point of those kinds of changes.
Yeah, I think Bass Connections really helped ground my entire kind of narrative at Duke, because I ended up creating my own degree at Duke and bringing multiple disciplines together. Bass Connections was always there to help me think through how did all these disciplines come together. So when I would do other internships or projects with our Duke's Health Policy Center or Duke's Health Innovation Institute, or trying to think about whether I'm developing quantitative skills or qualitative skills or implementation skills or systematic review skills. Throughout each of those steps, I was trying to bring all these disciplines together. I could really use Bass Connections as my platform to take all the things I was putting together in my coursework and then actually implement them in practice. And then I felt like by the time that I left Duke, I had a pretty strong toolkit across all these different disciplines to continue that work in graduate school and med school beyond. So I'm really grateful that I had that experience. And I'm not sure I would have been able to put together my interests in the same way if I didn't have that kind of central Bass opportunity throughout my 3 years.
Right. I mean, if you'd had just kind of, more conventional degree program where that is focused primarily on coursework versus, having this, it almost sounds like kind of a hub for your other academic experiences and, a way to tie those together, because I also think that's often a difficult thing, especially as an undergraduate, to see, how are these different things I'm learning connected, and how do they connect with anything that I'm going to either want to know or do later when I'm done with being in school. So, Catherine, how about for you? How is that interdisciplinarity related to your academic work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interdisciplinarity was helpful. Like I'm in the public policy school is very interdisciplinary already, and so it was nice actually for the undergrads. I feel like it was really nice to incorporate more people with a stats background, a computer science background, like very quantitative skills that got a super social justice qualitative kind of contextual frame for where their work could go, I think in the real world. And I think they were really excited about that. And also the folks who were pre-law, who, I think you think of law school as just being I think of law school as being very dry and, just doing a lot of cases and a lot of books. And it was just, I think, very eye-opening to kind of, here's what, the legal system really looks like on the ground. And I think even more than the interdisciplinary nature of it might have been the ability to work with people in the community and really kind of go into the community and seek the people that we wanted to learn from, rather than having people from the community come into a classroom and give a lecture. It was
Right.
like we were trying to go into where they were and learn, what their world looked like, and try and, kind of use research to do that, which I think for a lot of us, carrying people's words with us through the years as we go through our careers, you hear things that really get you, you hear struggles that people are working with,
Right.
of like, problems that really need to be solved in the real world that we can use our studies
Right.
to work on. And so I'm hoping that's definitely what I got out of the project, that I hope others did as well.
Right. So it's kind of the theory and practice bridge, as well as the interdisciplinary bridge. And, I agree. I mean, being able to see not only kind of the bigger picture that your research or your academic work or your professional work might fit into, but also, how it ties in with the things that are really going on. I think that kind of a cliff that a lot of people fall off when they graduate from college, and they've been in this kind of very almost idealized environment, and then suddenly, like, wait a minute, how does this fit? So it would seem to me that students coming out of this type of a approach would be better prepared, whether they're going straight from undergraduate to a job or to further study. It's kind of more realistic way of doing education. So what about you, Matthew? Sounds like the interdisciplinary aspect tied in with your interests to begin with too, but what were the eye-opening experiences you had around that?
To really take apart from both Catherine and Sahil, I think Catherine mentioned, the fact that criminal justice classes, like there isn't sort of like a criminal justice major, and Sahil's point about, Bass Connections being a part of the curriculum in the fact that you can take it as a course. I think one of the key benefits for students of the interdisciplinary major is being able to sort of, pursue research in niches that don't directly fit under one department. For example, like, criminal justice, like me and Catherine are working in, it has obviously lots of relations to political science, but also the healthcare fields and, public policy, of course, and statistics. And there's, sociology. There's so many different, types of students. Psychology, there's a lot of psychology students, and also one of the professors on my project works in the brain sciences. And I think there's just, with interdisciplinary fields, sometimes, the coursework might not directly relate to what, you're interested in or you're potentially interested in. And I think that's one of the benefits for students of the Bass Connections program. I also have, sort of the pleasure of serving on the Provost's committee for the Bass Connections. So working sort of on the faculty and administration side, on sort of the back end of Bass Connections. And I think something we've talked a lot about there is just the benefits of being able to connect professors from different departments who might not usually have sort of interactions, and being able to partner them together to work on these projects. And the team at Bass Connections really does a good job of, trying to make sure that every school, every department is represented on that committee, as well as just making sure that, anyone who wants to work on a project really has the opportunity to, whether or not it's, getting someone from the divinity school involved with someone, from the biology department or from Sanford and public policy, these academics who might not have a lot of normal overlap. I think the Bass Connections gives them the opportunity to work on these interdisciplinary research questions. And obviously this has added benefits for both the students, and, as Catherine was saying, rather than interdisciplinary, there's also sort of outer disciplinary outreaches. Not every Bass Connections program directly has sort of a Durham stakeholder affiliate, but I think probably the majority of them do. And there's a lot of work being done and then with local leaders, not just in the criminal justice sphere and, the health sphere, like Sahil was talking about, as well. And there's just so much work that goes, across the university and outside into the Durham community.
So thinking about people who may be watching this, either, it's faculty who are considering using a project-based approach, even if it's on a smaller scale than exists at Bass, or for students who might be entering into a project of that kind, what have you learned from your experience that, might be helpful? What recommendations would you make either to faculty who are thinking about creating a research project orientation for their methods classes, or for students who are entering into something like this for the first time? So, Catherine, why don't you start, since you've got more teaching experience? What would you recommend?
Sure. I mean, I think I'm a big fan of hands-on research, which Bass is all about. I feel like you can teach all sorts, try all sorts of methods of teaching people what research is like in theory, but there's just nothing like getting out there and collecting data. And in my project, it just worked so well to do interviews with expert stakeholders about the issue. And I think that, experts have a lot to say about, their jobs and about the issue that you're talking about if you do a good job of finding the right experts. And so, it's a really easy way, I think, for students to learn about qualitative interviewing, for students to develop, connections, and to, and we took the data and we analyzed it, using qualitative software, and we worked as a team to do that. And it felt very fulfilling, I think, on all ends. Like, I think the stakeholders were excited to, learn about our research, excited to share, excited to refer other people that we didn't know about. And, they had a professional interest, I think, in the project. And so it wasn't a high budget kind of endeavor. We didn't have to do a lot of compensating or anything like that. And the students worked very well together in terms of learning to interview, practicing with each other, using the software. And so I think for a lot of areas, that can be a really nice way to get hands-on, learn a lot about a topic, and also learn those methods along the way. So I would definitely suggest that.
And so then, when you go back to the books and methods resources and published research, you have some sense about what goes into this, and what you want to know from the articles that you read, because you're thinking, well, this is what I did, but how did they do it? So
exactly, yeah, that's a great point. Like something like inter-rater reliability, which is just something that you learn about, and you're like, okay, that's a check mark that you have to pay attention to when you're evaluating research. And these students know, like, when we tried to code our interviews together, we weren't on the same page. We had to build consensus. It's just, it becomes very practical, and I think really relatable to build those skills that way.
How about you, Sohail? What recommendations do you have, especially since you're now kind of, on this other side into graduate school? What do you recommend to, especially to people who are thinking about going into advanced academic work?
Yeah, well, I think I'll kind of start to build off Catherine's point, thinking about how do faculty think about building the teams. And I think one of the things we'll notice that Bass Connections, often faculty and graduate students, whoever leading the teams, have so much on their plate. So when you're thinking about designing the experience for the students, how do you kind of tap into the existing resources that the university already has? And so, for example, when we wanted to teach our students about qualitative methods, we have an amazing Duke Social Science Research Institute that has dedicated like a help desk staff who can teach you about those methods. And we wanted to learn about data visualization, we could bring in these really awesome folks from the library. When we wanted to learn about how do you write a policy memo, we have experts in Stanford Public Policy School who can teach us how to do that. And so from thinking about how do you kind of create a sustainable model where we recognize we all have all these other responsibilities and wear all these other hats outside the Bass Connections team?
Mhm.
How do we leverage what the university already has,
Mhm.
so we can actually kind of have the most kind of smooth experience as
Mhm.
possible? I know of some teams that have a little bit less structure, and don't really have defined kind of learning objectives of what they're doing each week and clear kind of
Mhm.
charters and timelines, struggle a little bit more than teams that have a clear vision of where they're going from the outset and have kind of clear scheduled activities. I think from the student's perspective, I think the biggest advice is just having a sense of openness. I think what we realized that we did some, I was also on the Bass Connection advisory team, and we were interviewing students about their experience with Bass. And sometimes they realize, you know what, things often don't go to plan in a research team
Right.
like they do in class. In class, you know, you do your exam, you study for your exam, you write your paper, and you're all done.
Right.
But here, when you're realizing students are dealing with the IRB for the first time, and they're dealing with data collection, but they can't reach their participants to schedule a time to interview them. And
Right.
all these, they're working with new team dynamics, and there can be tension. So all these things that are so real world,
Right.
realize are so part of your day-to-day in the real world, both in graduate school or after you graduate. Those could be frustrations for students in the moment. And learning how to kind of deal with those in a safe environment is one of the kind of most helpful lessons you're going to learn in an applied research experience like this.
Right. Right. Yeah. Very, very important lessons to learn, because, otherwise, I mean, it's like if you run into these kinds of glitches that just happen all the time when you're doing research, or you find the participant and you are in there, but then they don't really want to talk about what you really want to hear about, or whatever. Well, how do you deal with that kind of stuff if it's not something that's generally covered in methods, kind of coursework, or books. So what about you, Matthew? What do you recommend?
I think as like an undergraduate student, like so many of our experiences are really shaped by being in the classroom and working under a professor in sort of, a lecture or seminar type setting. And I think that once you get into the research realm, those dynamics sort of change. And especially given the interdisciplinary nature of Bass Connections, you might be coming in as a statistics student, for example, and one of your professor leads might be neuroscience, or any sort of combinations. And obviously this professor has a lot of experience doing research, publishing papers, working with stakeholders, but they might not be an expert in your field. You're really being brought on the team to make recommendations. And you're working with data for the most part that your project leads and your project managers, the graduate students, they're seeing this data for the first time too. Things can get missed. You might have an insight that no one else noticed, and that's the joy of working in research, is you're figuring things out. And I think there's a bit of a learning curve there, but I think the Bass Connections model, just given the interdisciplinary nature, really sort of I think helps ease undergraduate students especially into being willing to challenge the notion people are coming up with. I really had sort of an interesting experience because I started my, criminal justice Bass Connections during the summer of 2020 after the killing of George Floyd, and sort of, the whole field of criminal justice really being looked at from a critical lens. We had already laid down like a month of work, and we really just stopped and said, okay, there's this huge societal context that, we might not have been properly considering, and just like going back and rechecking all those assumptions, and bringing in our own personal experiences. And I think, research outside of an interdisciplinary field might be very siloed, and, all students coming from the same backgrounds, they've had this professor for all their classes, it's a very different dynamic than when you're getting students from across the university, so many different experiences. But I think that helps the research in the end, and is the reason why we're able to tackle a lot of these, bigger interdisciplinary questions.
Right. So, from your description, I mean, part of it is, finding yourself in a position of being, having some autonomy, versus in the classroom where, basically, the professor is, has figured out what it is you're going to be doing, and you're, you're taking your own approach to it, but still you're following. And here you have a chance to really take a leadership role at times, and to take some responsibility, in a way that might not, be, typical in an undergraduate experience. So, that seems important. And I liked your example with the George Floyd events, I mean, where, you have the chance to be more responsive to things that are going on versus, being in a more, kind of fixed, curriculum where, it's the same class that was taught this way last year, whatever was going on in the world, which again, I think ties in with some of the things Catherine was saying earlier about, really helping students, not only bridging within the university and the way, as you were describing, Matthew, to kind of take different roles and, interacting with professors as an expert and as someone with experience and with insights, and the kind of the power dynamic shifts a little bit, as well as to situate all that within the world. So really seems like a lot of valuable opportunities, but then something that people will really have to have a different mindset to approach, both as a faculty member as well as for students. So is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't covered yet that might be of interest to our readers?
Yeah, I have one thing to add that just made me think of, coronavirus, which was not in the picture when I worked with my, colleague to propose our our grant, and then very much came into the picture. And I think that if we had been working on another type of research project, I think like maybe another type of externally funded research project with, very clear goals that did not, have anything to do with a pandemic, I think we would have had a very different experience than what we had with BAS, which was the perfect type of project to incorporate, the any COVID related questions we had. And that's what we wound up doing. I mean, our project wound up looking very different than what we had proposed, but, maybe for the better. We had a lot of interesting COVID questions that we were able to ask of the folks who were working in jails and kind of managing the crisis. And that's the direction a lot of our deliverables wound up taking. Like in a couple of months, we're presenting, some information that's COVID focused about jails and how jails handled, disease management in their facilities. And that was just, a really, it was just really nice to have that flexibility of being, working with a budget, working with all of these resources, and being able to kind of on the fly be able to address some of those issues. So I think BAS is just, it's hard to think of another situation in which that would be possible or so easy to do something like that.
Right. So, maybe for people watching or thinking about trying to start a project like that, to think about, well, how do you balance the sort of planning and design that needs to go into any academic or research project, but allowing for some flexibility to address things that come up, because those might have a real learning potential.
Exactly. And it's a great way to exercise that muscle of kind of a team being able to respond together to, a shifting research question over time, and a really unique opportunity.
What about you, Matthew? What else? Is there anything else you would like to add?
I think, we have Catherine here, and I think it's just such an example of the BAS connections. I think we really, within the program, leverage the graduate students to their fullest potential. And I think they're just such invaluable members to every single team. I think, a lot of us, coming in, we had ideas of research. It's like, oh, you're working directly under a professor, and, you're just sort of like doing their bidding in the lab or whatnot. But I think sort of having a more expanded team where you're working with, someone who isn't too far removed from your own experience as an
Right.
undergraduate, and who can bring in that additional insight from whatever field they're in. I think that's something that the Basque Connections program is really they really focus on, and I think it's going to help in my own team, and I'm sure in other teams, just having sort of someone in that graduate student role who's able to just be a member of the team, take on that project manager role most of the time, and sort of really lead the undergraduates through the experience.
So do you think that having that kind of experience with graduate students as an undergrad helps to prepare you to think about, well, do I want to go to graduate school? What kind of graduate program? What kind of the reality of that, advanced study, is that something that either you found helpful or you see with your other students?
Yeah, I definitely think that, Duke has almost like twice as many graduate students as undergraduate students, but they're really outside of the classroom aren't very many overlaps between them. I think Basque Connections is definitely a strong sort of, quasi-academic sphere where you're able to interact with graduate students. And, once again, harping on the interdisciplinary major, potentially graduate students outside of your own department. I mean, the odds that you're really interacting with grad students outside of the classes you're taking in your major is not very high. But I think that, being able to hear from their experiences, where did they go to undergrad? How did they get into research? It's just like an invaluable connection you're making through the research experience.
Right. A lot of networking. What about you, Sahil? Anything that you would like to add, especially given that you've come out of this program and now you had the Fulbright experience and the med school experience?
Yeah. I think as someone who's 2 years out, what I didn't expect is when we think about what is a successful team, we might think about what are kind of the projects that they finished or the community partners they engage in that 1 year span. I don't think when I first came into this experience, I didn't think I would realize that this other students on my teams and the faculty members are lifetime mentors and colleagues. So I'm 2 years out and I am still working with my same faculty member who led my team my sophomore year. So this is like, we're in year 5 of our mentorship mentee relationship. And I know that she'll be there my whole career, which is incredible. And same thing with the students. I have students who are maybe 1 or 2 years younger than me who are also just graduating at Duke, and they're reaching out for career advice. How could I apply to medical school? Or can you help me walk through this decision? So it's really interesting that had I not had that experience, kind of the same levels of support, both at the faculty, graduate student, and kind of my co-undergrads had. It's really cool to see how that's sustained for 2 years out. And really excited to see what community we'll have going forward. And I hope Matthew and Catherine, you have similar experiences by the time you finished your journey at Duke too.
Right. So I think you're all, really pointing to that the value of doing, this kind of interdisciplinary, hands-on, and not only interdisciplinary, but kind of multi-level, because you've got faculty, graduate students, undergraduates, and external stakeholders. The value of that, to you is way beyond, well, you got the credits for this class and you got this degree with these letters behind your name, that it's really becomes a part of who you are and what you can do going forward, and building those connections that can help you to have more impact and hope and to enjoy the journey as well, because you're making friends with people who are going to provide that kind of feedback and problem solving, troubleshooting, as you encounter things going forward. So, well, thanks to all of you. Really enjoyed our conversation, and I wish all of you the best in the next stage of whatever you're doing. And it sounds like you're well on your way. So thanks for sharing this. I hope that it will be useful to our Methodspace audience.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to participate.